In this video, I'm going to go over a 3-step formula for writing an introduction to a college essay. I'm Sarah from Written Well, and I'm excited to talk about how to write an essay whenever you're stuck at the beginning, or perhaps your introduction is just messy or perhaps misguided. I've run into this a lot while working at the Writing Center at my college, and so I'd like to share a little bit about how to create one just from scratch. Now, there's typically 3 steps, as I've mentioned. The very first is writing your hook, the second is creating some background information, and the third is going to be introducing your thesis, all within one paragraph. Now, to begin with the hook, there are typically 4 very strong methods that I recommend for students. The first 2 are actually quite a bit more universal than the second 2, so let's talk about those first, and I'll give a few examples and then talk briefly about the second 2. So the very first one is creating a compelling fact or using some data to support, what will be within your essay, sort of a broad topic piece, something to interest us. For example, say you're writing an essay about importing tea. You could talk about how, it's a misconception that a lot of people assume that black and green tea come from different trees, but actually they come from one. You could also use a piece of data such as, according to the Children's Bureau of the United States, over 400,000 children are actually in foster care every year. About that. And of course, citing those facts within your introduction, but something to kind of pull someone into your argument and be interested in what you're going to talk about, even if you didn't actually pick the topic and your professor did. You gotta make it interesting. So another very compelling option is to use an anecdote. Now, if you're writing a research paper or something where you're able to kind of get a personal story, finding, perhaps a piece of news that talks about someone involved in, let's say, a drunk driving accident, perhaps that's your topic is, a solution to drunk driving. You could use the example as your introduction. You could say, Mary Lozier was only 19 years old when her mother died in a drunk driving accident. And then perhaps later you're going to kind of bring that anecdote back in your conclusion when you're suggesting, again, your solution to this problem, which we'll get really deep into when we get into the thesis. Now, the 2 remaining sort of strong options for creating a hook is, of course, a question or using a quote. Now, both of these you want to be a little careful with because they can kind of skate on the edge of being unprofessional, especially if you use the word you in your question, because that means you're jumping into second person. Some professors will allow that and be totally fine with it, but there's others that think that is just not appropriate for academic writing. So if you're going to use a question, I recommend keeping you out of it and saying something simple such as, which is better, peace or justice? Something like that, if that relates to your topic broadly. As for a quote, the formatting might vary depending on your style, whether it be APA, Chicago. You might begin with just a piece separated by itself as a quote, or it could just be part of your paragraph. You'll have to check the style guide. But you could have a quote as long as it relates directly to the theme of your essay. Perhaps someone's being interviewed that has something to do with the scenario that you're going to use as evidence throughout your essay. Or maybe it's just broadly related. It's maybe an Oprah quote and you're relating it to an essay on positive psychology or something like that. Now, with those, just be careful to stay professional and make sure that it's something actually interesting so that some random reader could come by and actually want to pick up the rest of your essay and read through it. Now, starting off with a good hook is extremely important, but then that hook has to lead somewhere and you have to connect it to what will ultimately be your thesis. And so to do that, you need to give us some background information, which is step 2 of writing your introduction. Now, background information could be a lot of things. In some cases, you're going to be updating us on recent scientific research that relates to the problem within your thesis. Other times, you're going to talk about sort of historical events that have led up to the thing that you're going to be discussing. You're going to keep us kind of in the loop with anything we need to know to understand why your argument is kind of relevant, what we need to know to kind of support or not support what you're going to say. Anything that, someone who's walking in has no idea what you're talking about could kind of just quickly read and then jump right into your essay, right? So a background information can be kind of long, it can be short. Typically it's between 2 to 6 sentences within your introduction. Now, after you've written a little bit of background about whatever your topic is, you can jump right into the thesis. Now, a thesis has kind of 2 elements within this last step. A thesis has to be arguable. That's something that college professors just get on to people about. I've had some students who come into my writing center at school and they tell me that, they got maybe a C on like a beautiful paper because the whole thing is not arguable. They just simply summarized, or they took something that just you can't really argue with and just talked about its merits, and there was nothing that anyone could really see like why they were writing it, I guess. Now, it doesn't have to be an extreme stance. It doesn't have to be like you're arguing something very heated. It could simply be that you're looking at someone's speech and you're saying, oh, this speech was not effective in addressing elderly people. Or it could be this speech was effective in unifying, the group that was listening to the speaker. Something that, it doesn't have to be super intense, but it does have to be something you have to prove. And a lot of people like to use that word effective when it comes to looking at rhetorical analysis type of pieces. Whenever you're looking at a speech or perhaps a movie, were they effective in telling the story? Other times you're going to simply be arguing like, is this medicine better than this one? Should these sort of businesses close? Should these sort of businesses open? Should the government enforce this type of law? It's got to be a very clear piece. So for your thesis, you're going to have that clear little argument. And then to kind of solidify the organization of the rest of your essay, you have to introduce a little bit about what you're going to discuss. Now, you might be familiar with the 5-paragraph traditional style of writing an essay. I'll make a video on it in case you're not, because it's very important to kind of understand the fundamentals of writing an essay before you get into any type of unique or creative or even risky decision type of essay. I think it's really good to start with the basics. But typically with that 5-paragraph essay, you've got your intro and conclusion. In the middle, there's 3 body paragraphs, and each one connects to a topic to prove whatever your argument is. So it's like the categories that relate to why your side of the argument is correct. So for example, say we're doing a rhetorical analysis and we say, Martin Luther King's speech was effective because he used inclusive language, he used alliteration, and he used metaphor, let's say. Now, if all 3 of those things are, kind of sprinkled within his speech and what other people use to analyze his speech, you could take, information from each of those and put it into those 3 paragraphs all under those topics. And now to quickly summarize, you put, a word to signify each of the topics at the end of your thesis. It will look a little bit like this. Okay, so that is basically it. You need a hook, you need a background, and you need a thesis. Now, normally I would ask you guys to watch another video that might go deeper into it, but because this is my very first video, there's not really much to do, no website to go to, but I would very much appreciate it if you gave me a thumbs up and or put a comment below so you can let me know what I should kind of do a video about next. All right, thank you guys and good luck with those introductions.